Oh, hey, ooh. Just gonna see about raising you up a little bit. Son of a bitch. Come on. Really? What? There we go. There we go. There. You gonna stay like that? You gonna stay like that? Cool. Let's go ahead and restart. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So, Jedi Survivor, the long-awaited sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, has finally come out, and it's been long enough now that I feel like I feel comfortable enough talking to you guys about what I thought of the game now that I've completed it, and be a little bit spoilerly. There's going to be spoilers. But since I don't really do game reviews all that much, I thought it would be appropriate to set up some kind of gauging system to let you guys know what I'm thinking, how I view the game, its replay value, stuff like that. And that's where I got the idea of a replay value number system, where we'll go from 1, you're probably not going to play this game more than once, if at all, to 5. You know, if you play a game more than 5 times, there's a lot of replay value in it. You're going to be playing it a lot of times. Anything in between, we'll talk about it. Let's get to the game. Yeah. So I gotta tell you, I got a lot of mixed feelings about this game. On one hand, I really enjoyed the game overall as a collective whole. On the other hand, there were a lot of other aspects about it that kind of dragged down my experience a little bit, and it's really going to affect that overall replay value number. But what I'd personally like to do is to try and give a compliment for something that I'm going to criticize here, because it's really kind of even Steven with the things that I enjoyed versus the things that kind of, not so much. First of all, completely overhauled combat system. You're going to be using all these different types of combat styles from that expand upon the kind of fighting styles that you had before. You got the dual wielding action that you didn't have before. You had lightsaber and blaster combo that I personally was one of my favorite styles to fight in. And also the introduction to the crossguard saber, which also ironically at the same time was one of my lesser favorite aspects about the game, but I'll get to that in a minute. But even still, the combat system is really evolved, and it's really fun to, learn the pros and cons to each fighting style and really try and like master them for a fight, which the fighting itself is just really, really fun because, when you're cutting down stormtroopers left and right, deflecting blaster bolts back at people, using the force, things like that, it's all super fun, super fluid. I never really had a problem with the combat system. It's probably the strongest part of the game overall. However, at the same time, when I found out there was going to be a crossguard aspect, I was actually really excited to see that applied into the game because, with all these different fighting styles, I was kind of hoping to see sort of a Kylo Ren fighting style with the crossguard lightsaber, but in reality, for whatever reason, the crossguard version of the lightsaber is wielded like a greatsword because when you're swinging it, your actions are really slow, really hampered, and it really confused me because I was like, aren't lightsabers like weightless? Like, why are you swinging it like Cloud's Buster Sword? Like, this doesn't make much sense. And I had someone explain to me, their reasoning for it, and it made sense at the time, but even still, in the game, I was really excited for this particular aspect about the lightsaber getting the crossguard, see about trying to fight like Kylo Ren with that kind of really brutal style that he fights with, but you don't really have that. And unless you're a really patient kind of fighter, it's just not really the style that you want to go for when the action is so fast paced, especially for someone like me that likes to charge in and do as much damage as possible. And with the crossguard saber being a weapon that does the most damage, it also is super slow, so you're also going to be taking a lot of damage if you don't time your attacks just right, and that's just not the way I like to fight. I like to get in there and just rip it up, but you can't really do that with the crossguard saber. Another thing that I really liked about the game though is I'm a very particular type of gamer where I don't like playing most games except free roam, and this game goes out of its way to be as much of a free roam with some exceptions, but I'll get to that in just a second. But I really like being able to explore the world around me, and this game does give you the opportunity to go to multiple planets and explore the world around you and explore the mysteries that it holds, and I really really like that element of the game. The only issue is, unlike most other free roam games that I play, there's just not a whole lot of reason to go back to certain areas once you've completed certain missions. For example, for games like Skyrim or Fallout, you know, you'll go to a location, you'll beat the bad guy there, you'll go and do a mission there or whatever, and at some point in the game, most likely, you're going to end up going back to that location for a valid reason that's put in the game to have you go back to that location. But for Jedi Survivor, you know, you'll go to this really expansive area of the map to do a mission, and then you'll have virtually zero reason to ever really go back there unless you're hunting for trinkets and stuff. And that's just, I don't personally, it just feels a little bit tedious to go through all the trouble to get back to that particular location, even with the fast traveling mechanism that they have, to go hunting for a couple of knickknacks, and then you virtually have no reason to ever go back there ever again. Do you see what I mean? And another thing that I noticed is when you're looking at the galactic map that lets you travel between the planets and the other locations that they let you go to, there are a lot of blank areas that keep the experience very limited on where you can actually go. If you take like the cursor over to those blank areas, the outline of those sections of the map light up, which tell me that eventually the creators of this game do intend to probably have a DLC that lets you explore those areas, which I'm really excited to see like what they do and what they expand on and where they let you go. But right now I have to judge the game as it is, as the base form it is right now, and ultimately, for a free roam game, it's a very limited experience, even for the extensive areas you're allowed to explore, because there's not a whole lot of reason to keep exploring those areas once you've found and done the missions that are done there, because once you've done the missions there, there's not a whole lot of reason to call you back there. Also, just a side thing I wanted to add real quick, but the relationship between Cal and Merrin is just by far the most wholesome relationship we've ever seen in Star Wars. Just objectively better than virtually all other relationships we have ever seen. Better than the relationship between Anakin and Padme, better than the relationship between Kylo and Rey, and yeah, even better than the relationship between Han and Leia. Because even though those two characters genuinely love each other, I mean, they got married, they had a child together, they argued about everything, and yeah. But in this, it's just really nice to see a healthy, portrayed relationship between two characters that genuinely have feelings for each other, and they don't fall into this trend that we've seen with Star Wars of just this toxic behavior that's very commonly done, that I'm happy that they've not done this time around. Yeah, those are words. But lastly, I would say the biggest problem I think this game suffers from is the lack of any kind of really meaningful villain. And at least compared to the previous game, all the villains that you run into during Jedi Survivor all feel fairly, I don't want to use the word forced, but it's fairly forced. I mean, you have Dagon, who's this Jedi from 200 years ago, back in the early days of the High Republic era, and he just kind of shows up and he almost instantly turns evil once you meet him, and there's almost like no real logical reason for him to turn just straight to the dark side as fast as he does. And I understand like the dark side has this corruptive nature that makes people just see things completely unclearly and react impulsively, things like that. But at the same time, you would think for Dagon's situation where he wakes up 200 years later and looks around and you have Cal being like, yeah, I'm one of the last surviving Jedi, and the Jedi Order, as you knew it, is pretty much gone. He would be like, oh, well, that could change some things, because I have these very sore opinions about the Jedi era, the Jedi Order of my time, but that Jedi Order is pretty much gone now. Maybe I'll stick around and see how things go and see the way things play out with you before I suddenly make my intentions clear. Like, Dagon would have been a great surprise villain, like far better than the one that we got later on, even though, frankly, I mean, it definitely was a surprise for sure, which again, I'm going to get to in a minute. I got a lot to say. Give me a second. But for someone who is set up to be the main problem for the overall story, it just doesn't seem to be that necessary for there to be a conflict between Cal and Dagon, especially by the end of the mission where Cal even kind of reflects on everything and is like, you know,
he kind of was a little bit batshit crazy, but I think he was kind of onto something, you know? Which ultimately just says to me, like, so we just went through all that for no fucking reason. That just seemed like you could have talked things out at some point. And I mean, there are moments where you do try talking to him, but that's a thing about this game. There are areas of the game where I think there should have been moments to sort of affect the direction of the story, and you don't really get those options. Even when the game's like, oh, you know, we're going to try and do this sort of thing, you know, hint that there could be an option, but then ultimately the game's like, no, we're going one way with this. It's like, well, why'd you blue ball me about this, man? Like, fuck off. Overall, it just doesn't seem like there is that dire of a situation as in the first game. There aren't the kind of villains that are as personal as in the previous game, where in the previous game you start and you're a Jedi in hiding, and then you run into Inquisitors, and then the Inquisitors are hunting you throughout the game, and that's a personal battle to deal with in the game. In this, it's like, oh yeah, you're kind of forcefully having to deal with this Jedi survivor from 200 years ago that's just your enemy because reasons, which you ultimately kind of almost agree with by the end of it all. And I mean, you do start the game dealing with one of the Inquisitors that you fight with, and I did like seeing her come back, especially with the damage you did to her in the previous game, but she's there for all of however long it takes you to beat that particular battle with her, and then she dies at the end of that conflict, and then that character is gone forever, and that chapter is closed. So it feels really like, oh, there's no real personal villain. And then you do get Vader that shows up, and he does kill some people that are significant to you, like Ciri, which I was like, oh, that sucks. And then you never see Vader again. I mean, they do hint at him in other areas of the story, but you never see him again after that point in the story. And it's like, well, shouldn't I be dealing with him a little bit more? Because he's with the Empire, he's hunting Jedi survivors. I mean, that's his job. Why can't you give me a villain that wants to kick my ass? And ultimately, the entire story boils down to the real surprise villain, which is Bode, your BFF at the very start of the game, who turns out to be a secret double agent for the Empire, who's pretty much like an Inquisitor, but I don't think he actually is established to be an actual Inquisitor. It's a surprise for sure, but then, you know, the things that he does and the reasoning that he does things, when you actually take a step back to think about it, you're like, why did you betray us then? Because he betrays you in the game, because during your conflict with Dagon, you're uncovering this secret planet that you can go to that's off all galactic record, and you and other people who are being persecuted by the Empire can escape there and live a free life and never have to worry about the Empire darkening your doorstep, and that's great. But what Bode apparently feared, which is revealed to you, is that he was worried that the map essentially that you're going to use to get to that planet is going to be given over to people who would essentially be the exact kind of people Bode would want to have in control of that map, and would have absolutely taken people like Bode and his daughter to live on that planet in peace. And again, this could all just be boiled down to the fact that he is being corrupted by the dark side. It does make people react irrationally. It's just sort of like, for someone who is so in control of himself throughout the entire game, this is probably someone who should have been so self-composed that these actions that he takes that ultimately screw you over in the game just shouldn't have even been options for the guy, because he clearly should have been like, I can actually think really rationally about a lot of things, because I've had to put on this facade to trick all of you this entire time without acting irrationally enough to even pique your suspicions at all. I should be able to keep my shit together when I'm working with people who virtually want what I want. It's just really a matter of how you take it. I thought it was really kind of a forced thing that didn't necessarily need to happen with this particular character. But, if you disagree, that's completely fine. Also, this is just me being petty, but the fall distance before the game, it cuts off and goes to black and just teleports you back to whatever ledge you jumped off of, is absolutely abysmal, because because we've seen Jedi jump from like extreme heights and land without a problem, but you fall so much as like maybe 20 feet and then you get ghosted back. And the amount of times I have jumped and have been literally like that inch
difference where it starts to go black and I'm like literally an inch away from landing, where if it was just an inch higher, I would have landed no problem, versus that extra inch and it just sends me back to the ledge is just, it was an infuriating experience and I really didn't like it. So if or when they do eventually add DLC, if they could maybe patch that to make it such a ridiculously short distance before you get teleported back, that would be great. I will say that Ghost Star is probably one of the best songs brought to the Star Wars music area of the franchise. I really enjoyed listening to that. I'm going through the mission that leads up to the end and that song starts playing and I just literally stopped the game and I just listened. And I don't really do that when music comes on. The only other game that I've ever done something like for is for Mass Effect. So when music can hit me like hard enough where I just want to be like, oh, I don't even want to move my character that will make sounds to disrupt this music because I'm enjoying it so much. So I have to say overall, despite some of my criticisms and how harsh they might have sounded, I did really enjoy the game for just as a collective whole. I did like a lot of the story elements, though I did have my issues with it. I like the relationship with Marin and Cal. I like the customizable options, things like that. However, ultimately, I would say the game's replay value is somewhere around a 2. And that's because the game doesn't give you a lot of reasons to keep playing the game after you've already beat it. Because the second time you play through it, you might up it to a higher difficulty, you might do a different fighting style, and that could definitely run for a completely new run through of the game, for sure. But the fact that once you complete missions in the areas that you travel to and then you virtually have no reason to ever go back, I mean, the second time you play through, you're going to do everything probably a lot faster. You're going to know all the tricks of the trade. You're going to know how to beat the puzzles that you need to get through. Everything's going to go by a lot quicker for you, I'm sure. And I feel like that is going to lead a lot of players like myself to not bother picking up the game more than twice. But I am hoping that once the DLC comes out, that will expand the game and make it far more playable and give the game a lot more replay value. But I have to judge the game as it is. And right now, it's a fun game. You just don't have an incredible lot to do, especially after you beat the main quest. And the main quest is definitely long enough, and a lot of the things that you do hint at the potential of the next game that I hope they end up making. It's just what they give you right now is just sort of very limited, especially for what they kind of tease you with those extra blank areas of the map, which is like, I want to go there, but I can't. And it's like, wow. It feels like that big area of the Fallout 4 map that's just covered with water and there's just nothing to do there. It's like, why is that there? Why is that there, and why can I not do anything with it? And then you learn like later on, like, oh yeah, the creators had intended to do something with that and then they never got around to it. And that's still a possibility for this game until DLC is announced, until the DLC comes out. And if they actually don't expand on those empty areas, that's going to be really, really annoying. But anyway, that's just my review of the game. I'd like to know what you guys think. Did you enjoy the game? What's your replay value for it? Are you just going to play it forever? Because I mean, that's awesome if you can. Comment below, let me know, and I hope to see you in my next video. See ya.